Welcome to Golden Black Live, segment one. It's because we're at the top of the hour and we appreciate you joining us for our final show of the athletic year. And that we'll be back, going to be here before you know it, but obviously before that Purdue Penn State game on September the 1st. But obviously this weekend, big game with a big weekend for football, obviously spring game. And maybe snowy condition, or at least cold conditions, I should say, in Ross AC. I don't think it's going to snow, but it will be just that. I want to thank our sponsors, Triple X on the hill, but on the level of Purdue tradition since 1929. State Farm agent Trent Johnson at trentismyagent.com, and Hilton Garden Inn when tomorrow's a big day to stay at HGI tonight. And Tom, you've well chronicled spring ball, kind of an interesting one in terms of who's not been there. But there are some guys you definitely want to pay attention. You've outlined that also on the side of who to watch for in offense and defense on Thursday. You did that. Just get a thumbnail of what might be some of the storylines. Is it Tyrone Tracy? Is it a couple of guys on defense you're going to be focusing on? It is a spring game after all. There's limitations of what we're going to see, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think you hit a big name there, Alan. Tyrone Tracy for sure. I think is a player of interest to a lot of Purdue fans. Created a bit of a buzz this spring, obviously, with his debut. He transferred from Iowa. He's from Indianapolis, went to Decatur Central High School. And yeah, he looks like a playmaker, and a playmaker is what this offense needs with David Bell gone. Of course, Tracy is a receiver by trade, but he's going to carry the ball as well. Sort of a role similar to what Jackson Anthrop filled last year, with maybe a little bit more running the ball from Tyrone Tracy, who has that in his background quite a bit. So yeah, keep your eye on number 3. He's going to be a lot of fun, I think. And I think that the backup quarterbacks, I know Aiden O'Connell is the clear starter here, but you know, Austin Burton, Michael Lamo, who's going to be that number 2 guy. Purdue fans, of course, know they've had to go deep in their depth chart at quarterback a lot in recent years. So having a good number 2 guy is always key, and it's going to be a fun battle that probably will continue deep into training camp in August, I think. And, you know, defensively, the secondary is really banged up. And I think the front 7 is going to be a fun group to watch. One of the transfers in the front 7, Scotty Humpich, number 46. Leo from Murray State's a guy that's caught a lot of people's eye. I really think this defensive line has a chance to be really good, even without George Karlaftis. But the X factor there is going to be, are there any playmakers of Karlaftis ilk? It looks like there's a lot of very good players, but again, are there any difference makers? And then maybe we'll get a glimpse of some guys, you know, Saturday. Like I said, Humpich is a guy to watch. Of course, there's going to be some personnel missing. But again, guys like Jack Sullivan and Branson Dean, and there's a whole raft of sort of unproven guys that I think have really caught the coach's attention this spring. Corday Sidner, Suleiman Paka, players of that ilk, Greg Hudgens, even the newcomer, Mo Amonade from West Lafayette, guys like that. You know, Mark Hagan thinks he can go 3 deep at every position. He may be right. But again, are there any difference makers on that line? Like I said, perhaps Saturday we'll see the emergence of a couple guys.
You know, one thing I would ask about Yanni Karlaftis too, obviously, is a name that's been well chronicled and a lot of interest about him at the Leo position, number 14.
Yeah.
At least could see him on the field, one would think, a fair amount on tomorrow afternoon in Ross 8.
Yeah, you'll see Yanni. Of course, Joe Strickland's the much hyped 4-star recruit from Indianapolis Rebuff who got here early. I guess I want to pump the brakes on Strickland and Karlaftis a little bit. While they are very talented, I think Yanni, you know, it's well documented with him. He's got to get bigger. He's got to get heavier after moving from linebacker to Leo. A lot of potential, but I still think he may be a year away from really being an impactful player at that position. And Joe Strickland too, he's very talented. I think he's going to get on the field this year. I guess I'm not sure how big of a role he's going to play, but maybe he'll surprise me and a lot of people. He is very talented, but I still think there's a level of physical maturity that's going to have to take place for Joe Strickland to have the type of impact I think a lot of fans expect.
All right, I want to get both of your opinion on this. Obviously, today, Board of Trustees meeting, we'll have information about a contract extension. We'll have some information in all likelihood about finalization, or at least from a financial standpoint, plans for Ross-Ade Stadium. Brian, I'll start with you just on Jeff Brom's contract. I know that you've talked to Mike Babinski a while back and not expecting a lot of major change, but the importance of it is still there. I mean, you cover recruiting and the need to be able to have him under contract for a long enough period, and one is expecting to have that done with today's Board of Trustees meeting.
Yeah, it used to be in recruiting where you pretty much had to have 5 years at all times on your contract. I don't know if that's still as big a deal because everything in college sports is so fluid nowadays on both ends of the spectrum. But I still think it's better than the alternative. And I still think it's not, I think it's important for there to be some sort of tangible sign of commitment from a coach to a school, but also a school to a coach. Yeah. So I think that stuff does matter to a certain extent. I think that's obviously something, especially after Purdue had the season it had this past year. I think it matters cosmetically, but also I think it matters in terms of, Purdue's ability to sell stability. So I think that kind of thing really matters for Purdue. I don't anticipate this being like one of those 10-year mind-boggling numbers sorts of things, but I think it's important that Purdue, at least be able to illustrate the status quo being continued on, in terms of perhaps the last agreement being extended, 2-3 years, whatever it might be. I don't know. But I think it is important that, stability be, something that's evident here.
Another thing, Tom, when you're talking about stability, and certainly you can comment on the contract, but also, the building project and maybe a $45 million phase one. We've hit on that a little bit, that this is the start of this process. Purdue wants to take this off in chunks. We talked about the tunnel, maybe also the dining facility at the north end of the stadium. What do you make of that in terms, again, is it just another commitment by the university and its ability also to go out and fundraise to get this project going and built?
Yeah, privately funded, expected to be a $30 million phase one renovation of Ross-Ade Stadium that initially was approved, I believe, way back in 2019. Right. And of course, the pandemic hits in full force in March of 2020, and a lot of things came to a halt. And of course, that project in the renovation plans, among those things that came to a halt, and appears ready to be restarted. And you got to keep up with the Joneses, right? I think most people realize Ross-Ade, needs some sprucing up, if you will. And these are some interesting, I guess, adjustments and renovations that are on the table. Alan, you talked about the tunnel that would run from the Kozich Football Performance Complex, obviously underground, through the student section out on the Ross-Ade Stadium, a much more direct route to the field for the players right now. And also, I guess it's understood that within that tunnel, somewhere underneath, there would maybe be some rooms where you could host recruits and whatnot, maybe meet at halftime as well as a team. And talked about the dining and nutrition center, sort of, I think, in that northeast corner of Ross-Ade Stadium, where there's now a Purdue team store. That would be the location to feed not only the football players, but I think all the 500 plus student athletes. And then the south end zone, guys. There's always been a plan to do more with that south end zone project. Of course, the scoreboard was added a year or two ago. And what's on deck there specifically, I think details will come out later. But again, there's a lot of potential in that end zone. I think we can all agree. So yeah, it's something that we knew was coming down the pike. It's going to be green lighted, and they're going to move forward to it and just kind of keep Ross-Ade Stadium, like I said, keeping up with the Joneses and making it a modern facility that caters to what the fans want now.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see on the tunnel, and it takes some time to do that. I'd assume that it will not be impacted in terms of they'll do it, probably start it right after the season, right? And,
Yeah,
and
it's
then
supposed to
try
start,
get it
yeah.
done.
Yeah, it'll start after the 2022 season ends, and it's slated to be finished by the start of the 2023 season.
Yeah, that'll be be an undertaking of
Yeah.
sorts, to say the least. To just to see that be kind of but it makes a lot of sense, obviously, with the location of the Kozik Center and being able to close to do it. I think that will be a good addition. And there's been some talk long term about the north end and doing some other things, or maybe bringing that closer. That maybe phase 2 or phase 3. We'll all be retired by then. No, that not true. But it is a one step at a time in this world to get those kind of things done. All right, Brian, I want to get a little bit of basketball in. You've got some basketball recruiting you'll be covering tomorrow, or some camps, but some news this week, and much talked about on our site with Fletcher Lawyer's decision not to play in the All-Star game, but also the fact that you have a back-to-back Mr. Basketballs at Purdue for the first time in a while. All things that are interesting storylines, but still some talent coming into West Lafayette next year. But also some guys you're going to be watching for classes 23, 24, et cetera.
Yeah. Which part do you want me to talk about first?
Well, you can start with Lawyer. Tell us what you think about
Up
that.
in the
I know
deep
you've
end.
done-
Yeah. So obviously he opted out of the Indiana All-Stars after not getting Mr. Basketball. You don't see that very often. I think it's probably a shock to the system, to a lot of people who've covered and followed Indiana high school basketball and Purdue recruiting over the years. Obviously a very competitive kid. Obviously didn't grow up in Indiana. I think that's part of it. I think, one thing to keep in mind with kind of the Indiana All-Stars thing in general is that I think that it's sort of been running up against a changing reality for these kids nowadays, where last year Caleb First and Trey Kaufman-Renn were playing an All-Star game 24 hours before they enrolled at Purdue, and Trey Kaufman-Renn ended up breaking his finger in that game. I'm not necessarily saying it's fear of injury that's the biggest deal, but this thing has moved into a very confined space right before these players have to move on to the next level. And I don't know if it's necessarily the same level of accolade that it was 20 years ago or 10 years ago, even, especially for kids who didn't grow up around it. A PJ Thompson, for example, whose dad played in the All-Star series, who grew up knowing how big of a deal the Indiana All-Stars has traditionally been in Indiana. There are so many things that come at these guys nowadays from an accolades perspective, from an All-Star event perspective. Back in December, I was at the Hall of Fame event in Newcastle. Fletcher Lawyer had just played, and I was just kind of waiting there to ask him one quick question before he went back to the locker room. And somebody came up to him walking off the floor to invite him to some sort of All-Star event after the season. There's all sorts of things that come at these guys nowadays. So things like the Indiana All-Stars don't necessarily stand out quite as much. So while his choice to not play in the Indiana All-Star series may not necessarily be something people are used to seeing, the last guy I remember was Josh McRoberts many years ago, who lost out on Mr. Basketball to Luke Zeller, and decided not to play for the Indiana All-Stars because of that. It's weird. It looks bad to a certain extent with Lawyer because it's his teammate, who won Mr. Basketball, Braden Smith, obviously. But I think a lot went into this, and I think it doesn't necessarily have to be spun any kind of way, but I think Fletcher Lawyer just really wants to get to college. And I think he's got a chance to be a guy who really helps Purdue next season. And I think that he just, if he'd won Mr. Basketball, I'm guessing he would have played, but who knows? I assume, I'm sure he would have played, but I think he's got his eyes on bigger things now. And as soon as Mr. Basketball didn't go his way, I think his attention turned to those things. So, it kind of is what it is. People can feel however they want about it. I'm sure there's a wide range of opinions on it. But that would be kind of my take on the situation. I think Braden Smith, to be honest with you, I think obviously the fact his team beat Homestead in the regional, that's kind of hard to overlook in this whole conversation. But I thought Braden Smith won Mr. Basketball as soon as they beat Carmel. The simple reality is that it's really hard when there are good qualified candidates in a close race in Indianapolis, because that game against Carmel got so much attention, as that was the game in the state, and I think that was probably the game that put things over the edge for Braden Smith. In no way, shape, or form was Braden Smith not the guy here. I mean, I think he earned the award very much, but I think it was very close, and in a very close race, it's hard for an out-of-towner to beat an Indianapolis kid. So that's kind of my barely coherent in my physical state of being take on the situation 8 minutes later.
Hey, Brian, a big visitor on campus this week. You talk about Nigel Pack being in West Lafayette, what that means for Purdue's, I guess, hopes of landing the point guard from Kansas State.
Yeah, he's obviously the guy here. I mean, he is. I don't think you could script a better, more in line with what Purdue needs sort of guy. Purdue's got background with him because it recruited him out of high school. Purdue's probably had a little birdie in his ear already because Bruce Weber was his coach at Kansas State. And my strong suspicion is that Bruce would have a opinion on where he should go now. This makes all the sense in the world, and it'll make all the sense in the world for Nigel Pack. All of the reasons it makes all the sense in the world will not be lost on Nigel Pack, is what I meant to say there before I completely zoned out. But things making all the sense in the world nowadays, I don't know if that's necessarily as big a deal, because so much is going to come at these transfers so hard and so fast, because Nigel Pack was a guy who 2 years ago, Gonzaga and Arizona wouldn't have even given a second thought to, because they would have looked at a 5'11", 6 foot scoring guard as somebody, hey, that's not our level. And they wouldn't have even given him a second thought. 2 years later, him putting up big numbers at Kansas State. Now all of a sudden he's Russell Westbrook in their eyes. So it's, Gonzaga really wants him. Arizona really wants him. Duke has been involved. Any number of schools are really going to want this guy, because he's obviously changed into something extraordinary over the last 2 years. But the good news for Purdue is that he's got background with Purdue. He understands Purdue. He liked Purdue out of high school. Purdue credibly recruited him out of high school. It just so happened to get Jaden Ivey and Ethan Morton first. I think his game fits Purdue very well. They've run things for Carson Edwards over the years. They've run things for Jaden Ivey over the years. They've run things in a different context for Sasha Stefanovic over the years to get guys like him shots. I think it being close to home probably helps in some manner, but this is going to be a deal where there's a lot of really heavy hitters coming at this kid and things like that. And he's going to have to decide what's really important to him, and he's going to have to stick to his guns on that. And but no one's going to blame the kid, you know, one bit if he takes a bunch of visits here to go see what's out there, because everything's out there for him right now. I think it would be human nature to want to see a bunch of different people here. Purdue's going to make all the sense in the world. Nigel Pack has already made his feelings known about Purdue as an option by showing up on campus the second the dead period lifted. I don't think this is a situation where he's looking at Purdue as like a comfortable safety school kind of thing. He is looking at Purdue as a priority type of option. And it's just a matter of whether or not Purdue can kind of cut through everything coming at this kid and really get across to him this is the place effectively enough to where you can override that kind of human nature element of, oh wow, Gonzaga wants me, I want to go visit them, or oh wow, Duke wants me, I want to talk more to them, kind of thing. If they can get it done this weekend, that would be unbelievable. That would be, you know, cause for a parade, because you need a point guard and you need a backcourt scorer. And he would give you both of those things to the extent that it's probably the best out there, the best option, the best realistic option out there that you could get. And it would be in one guy. So that would be something to watch. If he leaves this weekend without committing, I don't think that would be, you know, the end of the world. I think that would just be part of the process. And, you know, Purdue would have to dig in and, you know, probably wait this out a couple weeks. Purdue needs a guy though. So I don't know how long, the egg timer would be set for before they'd have to take somebody else. But it'd be a really big deal if they were able to get him this weekend.
All right. Well said. And we'll be keeping an eye on that. Okay. You guys are heartbroken because this is your last segment of this year. We'll be back in September for more. We'll obviously have a lot more on the site. You'll see more of Brian and Tom in the video world. But we want to say thanks to both of you for a good year, and we'll be back in segment 2. Now, our next 2 segments, segment 2, Roosevelt Colvin knows a little bit about Indianapolis recruiting. He's got 2 children that are, one playing at Purdue in volleyball and the other one that will be playing at Purdue in basketball. And in segment 3, Jerry Sichting, former NBA standout and obviously a player for Purdue as well, and a good one at that, talks about the life of Lee Rose and a lot more. So we'll stay tuned for that for segments 2 and 3, and we'll be back in 2 minutes on Gold and Black Live.